Asian, other, Tamil.
Asian, other, Tamil.
Vanakkam. Welcome to the Asian Other Tamil podcast,
a podcast that brings our experiences of being Tamil to the table
so that we can create a community that feels accepted, connected, and empowered.
We're your hosts, Stanisha
And Nishani.
And welcome to today's episode, Tamilakam.
The history you wish you knew. We have gone full clipboard.
She has. Which has allowed me to come like this.
I'm not a history buff, hence the clipboard. I can't retain any of this information.
The episode is going to be all about the Sangam age, is our ancient Tamil civilization and how that, like, what records have been found relating to that time in history. To put it into like relatable context, Ponniyin Selvan is a epic that is set in sort of that era of time, and when Nish goes into sort of like the history, she'll break down how Tamil Nadu and Tamilakam, not even Tamil Nadu, because Tamilakam expanded beyond Tamil Nadu, modern day Tamil Nadu. It was just like dynasties of Tamils.
It's like Game of Thrones, but like Sangam version. But like the Sangam version, like without the White Walkers. But quite literally, it was.
Having said that, though, maybe there are White Walkers.
Maybe. Like, speaking of breaking down, I had almost several breakdowns while putting this together because our culture is so rich and our moli is so rich, and we just we live in a place of sheer ignorance. We have to say, in all honesty, we just don't know how much is happening in our culture, parts of religion. I was so unaware. You know how you'd read like your English classics and stuff? Like, we have all of that. We've had it for a millennia.
Yeah.
And
a millennia, guys, is bonkers.
Yeah. And we haven't even thought about, Varsity Papam. Like, just.
But you know what?
So
if anything comes out of this episode research, is that I'm going to force myself to read some of this stuff.
Okay, so if we just give you some context, there were 3 Tamil kingdoms. So I think if you had watched Ponniyin Selvan, you'd understand the Chola Rajyam. And so there were 3 at the time. You had the Cheras, the Cholas, and the Pandyas. And they all have their 3 flags. So you'll see, so the flag emblem for the Cheras was like a bow and arrow. Cholas was the pulley. And then the Pandyas was like fish, render fish.
That's why, if any of you watch Pondiyin Selvan, Nandini has, spoiler alert, Nandini has a sword that has a fish on it.
So yeah, and what we're going to really kind of delve into today is the documents that were sort of written under Kalli. But I'm so passionate. What's going to get great is the stories behind how the documents came about and the history of what that has now become. So yeah, this time, the Sangam period spanned 300 BC to 300 AD. So that is like 600 years, but there's like a post-Sangam period that went into like 500 AD. So it's about 800 years. We still don't know. We had taken like loan words from Sanskritam.
Oh.
So like particular words have come straight from. And then we'll go into post-Sangam period. There's like a whole Sanskritization, which is what the process, and I'll get to that.
But that's like our names and stuff not being Tamil.
Yes.
It's like Sutta Tamil.
Yes. Yeah. So like Sanskritization, whatever how you pronounce it, was like a thing in the post-Sangam period.
Yeah.
And when I was talking earlier on about the different cultures being involved, sometimes dating the Sangam period time has been quite tricky because at the time it was a trade route for Greeks and the Roman Empire, which I didn't know going into it.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I was like, what? A part of me was like, I didn't even know they all existed on like the same bloody timeline.
Yeah.
And then
no.
Hey?
And you know what's so crazy? Because, and it was something I wanted to touch on, when we were at school and we were learning about all these great civilizations, you learn about the Greeks, the Romans, the ancient Egyptians. But like there isn't, we don't delve further into other civilizations that were intact and in place and operating at the same time. It's also because maybe people hadn't traveled, but clearly people had traveled, just omission.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's just omission, guys.
Yeah. Like you just don't. And I was like, oh my God.
Could you imagine if we were in school and then they were like, right, today's today for this term we're covering Sangam age.
Yeah. What? In the latter part, so from 0 to 300 AD was when I think around 2,300 poems are written.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And that's what they know, right?
100%.
And that's attributed to around 473 poets and from all sorts of societal backgrounds, villages. They were like farmers, they were businessmen, they were royalty. It's not just like bunch of people coming into, which I thought was quite important to state. And also, a large part of these poets were anonymous, but also it was specially mentioned there were also 27 female poets in this too, which I thought was great for the time. And it mostly deals with non-religious issues, the text, but there are some religious there's a lot of religious propaganda in the text also, but there are also like Saivism texts that are in there too, which we won't be going into too much detail today.
No.
Briefly mentioned, but not too much about in the religion. It's kind of keeping it about the Tamil Sangam culture, language thing. There's 18 greater texts and 18 lesser texts, and these are called the 18 lesser texts because they came later. The before 0 is like your millennia. We call it the Pathinenkilkanakku, which is the 18 lesser texts. So basically a lot happened in that latter part of the timeline. There's really not much that's spoken about in sort of like the Pathinenkilkanakku. Pathinenkilkanakku breaks down, by the way, to Pathinettu which is why it's 18. So it's very difficult for me to not be like Pathinettu. It's not, it's just Pathinen. So it's just like some nomenclature breakdown there for you. And there's 18 poetry compositions, and it's all about ethics, morality, and that's kind of it in terms of looking at the timeline. Those are two of the main things, you know. A lot of the stuff that we will be talking about will be sort of flitting between the Sangam, post-Sangam period, and we'll kind of break down that for you. Ahathir was the man who chaired the Sangams. Shout out, man, like Ahathir.
The first Sangam. Or all of them?
Yeah, so he was like the main chairman. Yeah, he chaired the first Tamil Sangam in Madurai. Other than that, so the first Sangam took part in Madurai, of which all the works are lost. Legend states that, you know, it apparently extended over 4 millennia. Which is wild.
Oh, well, that explains why there's no evidence.
Yes. apparently. And, you know, it was all sort of like swallowed up by the sea over time.
Yeah.
I also read scriptures on palm leaves only last about 50 to 75 years.
Which is crazy.
Which I thought we would have lost so much. I think they had like very intricate preservation methods for a lot of these things. I mean, they would have had to, right? Because they don't want the history to like, yeah. But I don't think it'll last that long. Do you know what I mean?
So sad.
So then those texts were lost, and then so the first Sangam texts are just nowhere to be found.
Yeah.
Then we go into the second Sangam text, and that's Kapadapuram. Yeah, not Thirpuram.
Kapada,
but not Kapandam.
I thought it was Kapa.
So did I. And then
this is what happens when like English is written into Tamil.
Yes, and then like the missions to find out what some of these words are in Tamil was like tougher than you think it would be. So the second Sangam, again, all the works are lost except Tolkappiyam, which we will go into a little bit later. So that's like one massive text that then went on to go and shape the third Sangam. So from that was what the whole of the third Sangam was derived from.
Yeah.
And again, legend states that all the texts in that Srenda, the Sangam, were swallowed by floods. At that time, which I mean, it makes a lot of sense because you do have natural disasters, and it is a very natural way of losing history. Yeah, it's so sad. But and then we go into the third Sangam, which is Ten Madurai, and a lot of the 18 lesser texts are in this Sangam, which is basically all derived from Tolkappiyam, the second Sangam. So it's like a chain of events. And for most of like the second millennia, it said it was like Sangam literature was almost completely lost and forgotten. People in Kumbakonam, and scholars, Tamil scholars, decided that, you know what, they're going to replace the palm leaf manuscripts, and they're going to like write it up, or they're going to like publicize it or put into publication or things like that. And it was done by writing them down onto new palm leaves initially, and then over time they sort of with technology kept it going. And these are rediscovered by colonial era scholars such as Aramu Hanavalar, who's Yalpanam scholar, Thamodram Pillai, who's also a Yalpanam scholar, and also Swaminathan Iyer, which I don't think he's a Yalpanam scholar.
Okay.
But I thought it was very interesting that two of them were also Yalpanam scholars at the time. But I'm sure there would have been a whole team on this. But I know for sure that I definitely heard of Aramu way before. But I didn't know he was associated with digging up Sangam literature.
Which is, because that's not how I was introduced.
Absolutely. And then it gets even more fascinating because we now go into Kumari Kandam. Which we're just putting it in here because I think it's a great conversation.
I think it was also asked. So like when we did last summer, I did sort of like, I asked you guys what sort of things do you want us to talk about, and Kumari Kandam came up. And it just felt so right to like place it in this history lesson.
Absolutely. And so Kumari Kandam is a mythical content believed to be lost within the ancient Tamil civilization, supposedly located like in South Indian Ocean. And so, I think it's called Lemuria or something in English.
Okay.
But I'm going to sit with Kumari Kandam.
There are beliefs in our Tamil historians or scholars believe that South India basically connected in like a triangle like this, like in the southern hemisphere. So it connected Madagascar and Australia with
this
South India. And typically because people in South India were deemed to be of deeper skin complexions and things like that, I think it sort of all just played a part in this thinking that there may have been like a Pandya type situation that just connected like the southern hemisphere that way.
And it's supposed, it's thought that apparently Kumari Kandam is associated with the Pandya kingdom.
Oh.
And so it says the Kumari Kandam was a place where the first two Sangams occurred in the Solinam.
Whoa.
Yeah, in the Solinam. Which is why it was lost, and I think that it's a reason for them to justify
the floods.
Yes.
Oh.
Which is what I think.
Are we believers, Nishani?
I don't know. I love a bit of controversy. But right at the end of this, many sources that I did read from, it was like historians debunk this entire thing and do not think Kumari Kandam exists. So
yeah.
But then I was like, have you watched Citizen though? Right, அடுத்ததாக we go into, this is I think my favorite part of Sangam literature by far, and that is just how the works are sort of categorized, and it's Aham and Puram. Aham meaning interior, Puram meaning exterior, and all the Aham text is basically based on love.
I think what's really quite beautiful in us doing our research was appreciating and realizing that society so long ago gave importance to love and like all forms of love. The Sangams were held in court, like in front of kings, like where scholars from like Nishani said, of every walk of life came, and women were welcomed. It was a very inclusive space, it seems. And back then in our society, we were so forthcoming to accept that day-to-day life is not just about what is captured in Puram. Like the Aham aspect of it is also equally as important.
Yeah. Puram is all about war, celebrating the heroic, celebrating battle, a lot of male characters.
And I think it was also things like it talk about how a king is to rule over his nation. It's a lot about policy, law and order, warfare. In
both sort of categories, the works are split into sort of groups called Tinehel, which we will delve into in the Aham section of things with more detail. But yeah, so Puram has Tinehel, And there were originally 7, which then became 12, which I'll sort of list here. Is like quite extensive. And that kind of really sums up Puram.
Puram literature and anthologies can definitely be studied, and it's from like a historical standpoint.
Yeah.
You would study it to understand how kingdoms were ruled and how, you know, how finances were managed and agriculture and warfare and things like that.
Seems
right?
like it's very non-fictional almost.
Yes, whereas Aham, I think, can transcend history in that sense.
To 2024.
And we'll go into that.
And we'll go to that.
This is the fun part.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I was like, oh my God, I got lost in her Aham. Like, I feel like, yeah.
I also like when we had our session.
Yeah.
To put together the episode structure, you were saying things, and I was like, so I spent the rest of this flashcard getting like sources, just trying to make it relevant to the current day and age, right? So in Aham, it's amazing. So 3/4 of Sangam literature is Aham, which says a lot. Love is love is love. Love is love is love.
Like, so Aham is generally, I could be wrong, it's not addressed to anyone.
Okay.
Yeah. It's not sort of like the love poems are just sort of like dramatic monologues.
Yeah, fine.
And they also try to keep the identity of the man or woman quite secret. Mm-hmm. I've not read any Aham.
In terms of, in terms of like they won't describe how they look.
And
so it's not like a.
They don't have a character name. They must have a character name. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, okay, fine.
That's what I'm thinking.
So like I'm just sort of thinking back to sort of like our anthology that we studied like during GCSE.
Yes.
And you'd have
Porphyry's Lover. Did you do that one? No?
I don't know why you remember this stuff.
Oh mate, that one got me bad.
So it's not like what's her face? The spinster. She has a character. Mrs.
From Great Expectations.
Ormana.
Why did I know that? But
yeah, because he wrote a poem. There was a poem about
Hag.
Mrs.
Havisham.
Do you remember in our anthology book? AQA anthology shout out if you know there was a poem about Mrs. Havisham, and like she had her wedding dress on and in her cupboard and so it's
really
not
depressing poem.
Yeah, so it was not like that where you have a character, but I feel like it might be a little bit sonnet wise.
And then I was like so that's a bit wishy-washy, but it generally was like it's not addressed to anyone, it's like podu.
Okay.
And I was like, all right, cool. Characters include hero, heroine, parents, brothers, village folk, dancers, entertainment people, like the whole shebang.
I love that.
I know. And it just gets, I'm so passionate about this section of the work. Anyway, the Tinehel are actually geographical regions. This Tine was created by Tolkappiyam from the second Sangam.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fine.
So you have, if I just sort of list them, you've got forest, mountain, agricultural land, coastal and wasteland, which translate to Mulle, Kurinji, Marudam, Neithal and Pale. And each of those 5 places that I've just listed fall under Ainthinai, right? Ainthinai is true love, matched love, reciprocal love.
Oh.
Yeah. You know, you got songs like Melody. Kurinji Malay.
Yeah, or like Kurinji Malay Uchi.
Right. So all of that, all of these songs have come from Sangam literature. In the Ainthinai, the 5 regions that I've just said are also attributed to different gods. So Mullai is Thirumal, Vishnu. Kurinji is Murugan. Marudam is Lord Indra. Neithal is Varuna. So then, and Pale was Kotrave. Like like in Sulal, if you have watched Sulal, a lot of the folklore that's parallel to the storyline in that series is the worship to goddess Kotrave, which I actually hadn't heard of until Sulal, and it's now nice to come back 360 to be like, oh my god, like and we'll talk about the communities that lived within these 5 regions a little bit later on as well, because I think that's so important to our history. So that's the 5 Ainthinais, and then you have 2 extra Tinais, which I think are fantastic. The second is, I think it's Kaikilai, I may pronounce that wrong, and that's unrequited love. So just like a one-sided Kavil.
Also a very common theme in Tamil movies.
Yeah, just one-sided love. And then you have Perunthinai, which is an unsuited love, like a Pariyappa and Neela Ambari. It's not happening.
Do you see where we're going with this?
Yeah, it's not good. It's not good. So those are 3 types of love: the matched, the mismatched, and then the one-sided.
So sad.
which I thought was so interesting.
Isn't it also? Yeah, it is. It's so interesting because they were able to recognize
Yes.
that love is
not
present
just,
in these ways.
and it's also and it's not just, you know, everyone falls in love and it's matched and that's it. No, like there's so much
it's quite
more to it.
realistic.
Very realistic. It's so ahead of its time.
Yeah.
So then those 5 are then broken into seasons, the 6 seasons of the year, also known as like Poluduhel.
For Mulle,
This is just to remind everyone, it's patiently waiting for the wife or like your lover.
and it's in the forest, right? And then I immediately thought about how many Tamil songs about lovers they are in forest.
Kadagale.
They're running around
after each
trees.
other, yeah.
They're running around trees, and it's literally them just like almost all of them, right? From the 80s, 70s,
Yeah.
they're always in like a Carter's situation.
Or like there's a bark and they're just like
yes.
a branch, or they're just
Yes,
like hiding
like,
behind the branch.
Summer, like they're in the rain, in the trees.
Yeah, yeah.
Like it's all there.
yeah.
And I was just like, oh my gosh. And we mock it.
Yeah.
We're like, well, you're just running around.
But actually, it's historic, guys. It's historic.
And they've deliberately chosen to place the lovers in the forest.
Yeah.
And like that's where directors have gotten their inspiration from.
Yeah.
And then on to the next
The
one.
next one is Kurunji, which is the mountain, and that's the secret union of lovers.
So then again, so I got one specific song. So in the film Run, right, Madhavan and Meera Jasmine are like on the run, right?
Yeah.
And then the song Minsaram,
Yeah.
they are like on a snow mountain. And I was like, oh my God, they're on the run. So they're Kalama running away.
Running around.
I was just like, oh.
I wonder how much of that was intentional.
I don't, even if it wasn't, I'm romanticizing it. So
Yeah.
it
No, but
was.
what would have happened, Anisha, is it would have been done a long time ago, and then people have thought, oh, that's nice. Like, let's continue it.
Yeah.
Like, Malayla video edukkirathu, Kaattukula video edukkirathu.
Because
you know
like
what I
I
mean?
think it's also like choosing your locations. I think
Yeah.
particularly in Tamil cinema when like songs and like is a huge part of like the storytelling process. It doesn't really make sense why we are like shooting in Tamil Nadu, but then like you're suddenly in Switzerland. Like it just doesn't. It's never made any sort of sense. Whereas like this now, even if it's not the case, even if it's not intentional, it definitely makes it make more sense.
And I think it has been derived from somewhere. It's someone has started it.
Why
and
would
then
someone
it's
just
continue? Do you know what I mean? And then it's just become a thing. Great.
Yeah. I'm here for it.
Maridam, which is a lover's quarrel. Do you have an example?
I don't have that one.
And then there's Nathal, which is despair.
So it was the example that I gave for Nathan.
And this is coastal region, by the way.
Yeah, that basically sort of like gave me the idea to do this little exercise. It was in the film Bombay in the song Uire. They're both just singing on edges of cliffs, and I was just like, and they are. It's like it's when they're singing because they want to be together, they want to be united, and I was just like, oh my gosh. And similarly in the film Jeans, in part of the storyline where one of the twins finds out that Madhumita has been like catfishing him, he is then on the beach just getting hit by the alien.
I can hear that BGM in my head right now. Yeah.
And I was like, oh. So there's like this thing, like being next to
the cuddle is despairing.
Yeah.
And the last one is Pale, which is wasteland, which is the separation of lovers and suffering.
I don't have one. I don't even know what wasteland would look like.
As a wasteland.
Adan.
Yeah.
I was thinking about where the hyenas are.
Yeah,
yeah,
right. The elephant graveyard.
Yes.
Yeah. In the distinctive phases of love, part of this, there's another 2 forms of love. Kalla kadal. There's Kalava kadal and Katpa kadal. And the Kalava kadal is interesting because it was sort of written down as premarital love, secret love, and it falls into the Perunthinai and the 2 types of the mismatched and the unrequited love.
Okay.
It's a little bit taboo of its time, and it was sort of known that if you have a Kalla kadal, that would then hopefully develop into Katpikadal. Katpikadal being Kalyanam Murchipura Kadal. It's legitimate. It's openly declared, basically, the Katpikadal.
Yeah.
The Kallikadal is like Kallama, Sera.
And it's so, do you know what I love about that? Like, Nangalellan Kallama Kadal Sayekla, we're thinking we're doing something, we're the ones that are inventing the wheel out here.
Yeah,
no, mate.
No.
They've been doing it.
We are just following Sangam literature. We are students of the Sangam.
When you get caught, but like, what are you doing? I am putting into practice what history has taught me.
Yes, that has been written. You know, what I'm doing has been written. So, and it was amazing because
this is it. Parents are gonna be like, even
justifying Kallakadal. They were talking about it in song lyrics for this day and how Kalli is used like Ipuri. We don't think about what it is, but it's come from the Kallavakadal in Sangam literature text, which I was like, pew, like when I read it, I was like, what? And the specific example, and I was like, I have to put this in the episode. It was a Kalvane Kolle Konda Kalli Nidane, and that lyric is from Ottahatta Kattiko, which I thought was amazing. It was literally quoted like verbatim in the text to be like, you know, like we bring it alongside Kalli's. We thought it was just like a, you know, something that is
Kalli is when you're doing something mischievous though.
Yeah.
Like when you're little and you're naughty, you're like, people will call you little Kalli.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just like, it's so crazy how it's been like carried forward after so many years and we're still using it today. Mind you, like the context is all wrong, but it's still present in our vocabulary. And now it makes so much sense why you are like, if you're naughty, you're called a Kalli.
The whole like Kallavakadal wasn't, there was no sort of like gender bias. It was very much for women to also express erotic feelings, sexual desires. And a lot of poetry there is a lot of that going on. And I thought that was brilliant.
You just made me like glitch on camera. I love that.
Yeah, it was so good. I love that. It was very good.
You just threw me off with erotic. I was like, what?
Yeah, literally she's like erotic sexual desires. I'm like, I'll put it in there. And like the next part of this section, it was great because there's such an emphasis of friendships for Kadal. Like it literally says, without your friend, the hero/heroine would not have been able to form a union without the friendship. Like
wingman, shout out like wingman, wingwoman.
The position of like your friend, your Tolin in this text of things was massive.
That's amazing.
And like a part of it was also that a big role for them was to sort of like hasten the Kalyanam, like
all of this is just like, it is like pure moments.
Yeah,
because
honestly,
it's just like without any of this information, do it anyway.
Yeah.
And it's just like the study of like human behavior.
Yes.
And that is literally what it is.
It's actually so anthropological.
Yeah.
Bear in mind, we haven't actually gone into the texts. We are still exploring the themes of Akam and Puram because a lot of the texts were either Akam or Puram. And so now we're going to break it down into the texts that fall within these categories. So in the third Sangam, we have two forms of literature. So there's Öttutohe and Pattupate. We're not going to really go into too much detail about each of these sections, except just pick out a couple of things that I thought were quite interesting. So in Öttutohe, there's 8 anthologies. The two texts that I think that come up quite a bit are the Purananuru and the Kuruntohe.
Yes.
And when I was doing my research, I was like, it'd be really good if there was, you know, someone who'd put music to the words. Like if there was like a Sangam album.
Oh.
Right. So I was on Spotify and I was like, there wasn't really much on there for like music attribute to the words. But then I did come across this composer called Raja Somasundaram. And he's done texts from Purananuru and Kurundohe. with various like singers. He's got like Karthik, Pragadi's on it, Bombay Jayashree.
Yeah, because they like whilst they were
Saindavi.
poems, they're also songs, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And yeah. So I was like, it'd be really good, especially for like our era kids to kind of listen to an album and be like, oh my God, like this is what the words are. And obviously it won't be like the whole, all the stanzas. It'll just be like a couple of lines on repeat or whatever.
Yeah.
I came across this amazing album called Sangam. And it's like a symphony of like Sangam literature. And it's like got these singers in it. And they've taken some of the varihal from the Patil and made it into like a really nice album.
Oh,
And
nice.
it's quite short. I will put like the link here, or like at least a cover of the album, so you can like go on YouTube. But I thought that was really nice, especially if you wanted to listen to some of the stuff that they talk about. So Patta Patte is the second sort of category of songs, and there's like a whole list of like prose in this. And it's just like 10 really longer poems. They kind of range between 100 to 800 lines.
What?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. 100 to 800 lines. Varies.
800
It, like,
lines
ranges.
is a book.
Yes. And it includes like a lot of Nakira's work.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we were trying to pick and choose how much you want to put in the episode.
Yeah.
But I think just the knowledge of knowing that there's Ottitohe and Pattapatte, I think is at this stage all right.
A lot of it has been used in like cinema
Yeah.
as well, which I found quite
And
interesting.
I'm pretty sure we had to do Puranalura text for a Tamil level.
Yeah, I think it is.
I'm pretty sure we did.
I think you would have.
Yeah. And I remember being so unfazed.
Do you think that some of these texts should have like a maturity rating?
Yeah, like a depth, like emotional depth.
Or
to
like life
understand.
experience.
Yes.
Life experience criteria.
Yeah, no. And I was talking to like my mommy, and I was talking about this, and they were like, "We learned all of this." Yeah.
Yeah,
Because
like
we had
Sangam.
to.
Sangam Kalam was there.
Yeah,
like,
Varalaru. Yeah.
it was on the syllabus.
We learnt it, but I couldn't tell you.
No, they can't.
I couldn't tell you anything about it because at
just
the
as
time
bad.
we weren't interested. Like, other bit also just noting here, because you haven't mentioned it, in the Yalpana library there was a lot of Sangam text that was held in that library that was completely demolished. Yeah.
It is one thing that is like a recurring conversation when you speak with our parents' generation about the Yalpana library. They're just like, like it was just stocked.
And like, I'm not gonna lie, until I'd done this research, the depth and the
weight
and the
gravity
of what we lost didn't actually hit me. It didn't actually hit me. I was like, oh my God, that must have been really sad for them. But then now I'm like, this is atrocious. Like, so in this within the third Sangam, the Pathinenkilkanakku, is what, you know, there's loads of texts that fall in here. But I just want to shout out, but idukkladan Tirukkural varudhu.
Oh yeah.
Like an 18th of this is the Tirukkural, which I thought was like, what?
Because Tirukkural is like regarded as like our book on like morals, ethics, politics, also love.
Yes. Oh yeah, it's everything. It's everything. It's ignorance. There's a whole chapter on like Ariyame. Like, I love it. It's just an Arivudame, intelligence,
and
like,
also like
charity.
It's a lot of God, but the God stuff is also a lot of just like your ego.
Ambiguous.
Yes.
It could be any
it's
God.
spiritual,
Yeah.
it's humbling, it's like keeping yourself in check.
And like, you know, it's like 1,330 like varihal. And I'm just thinking that in our head is a big text.
Yeah.
So could you imagine how big the other texts are? The last section of this little bit is the Anji epics that were also.
So these are like fictional stories written, which I also quite like the idea of.
I think it'd be very interesting to go back and read these. And like, Madurai Erital Kannahi, you've known, right? You know that story.
Yeah.
You've heard of it, but it actually belongs to the Silapati Haram,
Yes.
which I didn't know until I was doing this. I didn't know it was part of like a bigger. I thought in my head it was also very recent. I didn't think it was this old.
Yeah.
So that belongs to Silapati Haram. And Silapati Haram, so there's Silapati Haram, Mani Mehla, and 3 more texts, but the first 2 are kind of what is quite known fairly well. And Silapati Haram's all about, you know, the Korval and Kandahi. And also, really interestingly, this particular text was described as the Iliad of Tamil literature. And there was like I thought the comparison to the Greek literature was quite interesting there. And I was like, interesting why that's been compared like that. But as we know, there might have been some Greek involvement there. Who bloody knows?
Or
vice
you
versa.
can do some homework and find out what the comparison is.
And
maybe it is like contextually how it was written, the narrative, the voices.
And so kind of he sought revenge on the Pandya kingdom for her husband, Corvalan, who was wrongfully put to death.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in Mani Mahale, which is the sequel to Silapati Haram, it's about the daughter of Corvalan. And what is really stark about these 5 texts is kind of where, I'm not sure if it was the inception of other religions sort of writing texts, but there was a lot of Buddhism, like spreading the word of Buddhism, spreading the word of Jainism.
Yeah.
It's not just, Tamil, Hindu, Saivism. There was a lot of influences of several cultures and religions around this time.
Yeah. So you would have instances where saints, prophets, Nai and Madhal, we call them, were traveling throughout India, Tamilakam, spreading the word of Saivism.
Yeah.
And they would often encounter Jain kings and people who were of Buddhist beliefs, and even some, and I think this is where you mentioned the religious propaganda comes into it, because I think even some of the Nai and Madhal were converted into Saivism.
Yeah. There's constant conversation of Jainism, Buddhism, and Hinduism throughout the text.
Yes.
Consistently. It's not like a massive theme, but there is
acknowledgement of it.
In the Al Olidina was this person was a Jain monk and this person was a Buddhist monk, and heavy on the spirituality of the text. Spirituality was I think was the golden thread that wove this entire literature period.
It was a lot of importance and relevance given to spirituality and one's connection with God and morality and ethics and all of that. And sort of I think the idea is, as we move through the world, all of our morality is slowly fading away.
Sort of speaking about spirituality, religion, I then ended up on the dark web of the Sangam literature. And it kind of goes back to Aham, because what I was reading in this text progressively just got so more and more thought-provoking as I just ended up going down this page. And I thought, I'm going to raise it because we've not had some controversy in about last half an hour or so. let me raise it and see. So going back to the Aham and the Kurunji and the people that sort of lived in these different areas in terms of the literature, there was a lot of the conversation is about folklore and spirituality and religion, practice of religion in almost in the Kardil, but also in the Pale, the wasteland.
Okay.
In those two main aspects of, but I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if it sort of went in all 5 regions. And there was this text that I came across in terms of, they were called the Kurava girls, and I don't know if you've heard of them before, but Kurava girls, and this is mentioned in the Kurunji text in Aham, and also in parts of Puram. Everything that I'm going to say now, I will link the source here. And these Kurava people lived in the mountains.
Okay.
And they believed that the touch of Murugan troubled their virgin girls.
In that he has somehow connected with the girls.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think in these areas, you've got to remember at that time, highly spiritual.
Yeah. Their beliefs, their faith and everything
was it's that the longing for Murugan the longing to be with Murugan.
Yeah.
And the way they idolized him.
Yeah.
Romanticized him. It was a lot. It wouldn't have just been these Kurava girls. It would have been loads of groups of people would have had these sort of beliefs.
And I think it's also just worth mentioning for a bit of context. Murugan is a Saiva deity who has 2 wives. One is Devana, who is the daughter of Indra, and the second one is Valli, who is the daughter of
who is a Kurava girl.
Oh, Valli is a daughter of a mountain king, or like a king who presides over a group of people who live in the mountains. So that, and the sort of story of how like Valli and Devana got to marry Murugan was that in their previous life, they were so in love, like, and in love is not just like sexual feelings. It was like a devotion,
divinity,
like devotion love. They were so almost like obsessed with Murugan. In their next life, they were bestowed the right to be able to marry him. So that then being a central theme in girls to then be like, oh, I want to marry him.
Yeah. And so they were like the women who were it's called the Sangam age. What is said is the girls would exhibit like a sort of anangal. Like anangavinam.
Like wine.
Yeah.
Oh God.
And like this is like the reference for this.
Could Kurava be like Kurati?
I don't know.
Because we would call Valli
we call Valli
Kurati.
You know, the Kurava girls are in the Kurunji text and Akam text and all these in Puram text. So there's loads of sources here.
Yeah.
Really,
There's lots of like references to them.
Yes. Like adikadi in the text. And I wouldn't be surprised seeing in the Puram text, because if people were traveling and going for warfare, they would have come across these sort of tribes.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have been surprised if descriptions of these tribes were written in books. And so what would happen was they'd perform this thing called a variyatam.
Okay.
To sort of kind of pull the girls out of it, like snap them out of it.
Right.
Of this sort of Murugan like obsession trance thing.
Fine.
And you know, they'd bring a man in who was called the Velan, and he'd called a Velan because they'd give him like a veil.
Right.
And he'd represent Murugan.
Ah.
And again, reference for this is found in Kurundohe Ahananuru, I believe.
Yeah.
So he carries that. And, you know, they'd also put like a garland of green leaves on him. Malli hair, like bestow loads of like flowers.
Yeah.
And he would dance almost as if he was possessed by Murugan.
Okay.
In front of these girls. And I think it was always celebrated at midnight, mostly in like open space of the houses, and like you'd have a flag with the cock on it.
Yeah, the serval.
The serval. Yeah. So it's very like Murugan.
Yes.
Like almost like a
homage.
Dance ritual. Yes. At the same time, because obviously these are tribal people, their offerings would often be non-vegetarian things. So it'd be like a parel of this and then the rice.
Yeah, because I think it's also like taking into consideration, like you said, like if they live in rural parts of a country where they can't get grain and they're in sort of like, they're literally in the sticks. Yeah. They can only offer what they have. Yeah. And if their diet is mainly non-veg from like foraging and things like that, they would. That's their and
so there's musical instruments played. It was like a whole thing. Karpu kattavinam, like red karpu on your wrists and things like that. There was also mentions of paramelam at the time. And what was really fascinating about what happened after was it comes back to this Brahmin, the arisal of Brahmin culture and caste in the tribe. So what would happen was initially they were doing this variyatam, and what would happen as Sangam, I think, literature progressed, the Arupada voodoo came across. So
that was introduced by Nakira.
Yes.
So that makes sense.
Yeah.
Timeline wise.
He then said, you know, there are the Arupada Buddhas, which is basically 6 temples, like abodes of worship for Murugan in Tamilakam at the time. And so he created these 6 places. And what happened then, which I thought was fascinating, they then started putting Murugan inside the temple. I don't actually know what form it was in, because they've created the temple, like structures and everything. Yeah. But what was Murugan represented as, I don't know. And how the Siliyal came about, I don't know. My guess is it came from Brahmins. Yeah, I don't think they were actually Brahmins when they were doing the Sila, but because of having done that, this is a complete theory. Because of having done the work, they then put themselves there.
Fair enough. And I think it's also, I don't I wouldn't dispute what you're saying too much, because I know like in sila koilgal ulatila, you won't have a sila.
Yes.
You'd have
Yeah.
like Vairavar koilanda
Yeah.
Sulam
Yeah,
vechirupanga.
like Nallur is just a veil. So
Till today.
So there's two things that happened from here. The first is, this is a complete theory, guys. So they then ended up in the temple, and also food that was being, padacha sapadu went from matcham to marakari. I don't necessarily know what the process of the vegetarianism here was. I don't even know how it was introduced. I genuinely don't know. But it could have just been to like not associate themselves with those who are in sort of tribal worship.
Maybe.
So it went at that I think it's quite a crucial period. Obviously we can't go into it, we don't have time, but maybe we will. But it is a very crucial period in going from the inception of Murugan and Valli and that whole Variatum to then going into the temple to then becoming all vegetarian. I think that's
and what we sort of understand as like modern, like the Saivism that we follow.
Yes. What also is really beautifully illustrated is the Kalavu and the Katpukadal. So Devana is known as the Katpukadal, the openly declared matched love.
That's so funny.
And Kalavukadal is Kalli, the Valli. Ayyo, Valli the Kalli.
Also,
because she is known, and what is repeated often in this part of the Sangam text is that Murugan is a depiction of the Kalavu and Katpukadal, and his wives are exactly that.
That's so interesting because Devana was like Percy Banda Kalyana.
Yes, very,
like betrothed.
Yes. And I think it also speaks a little bit of casteism as well. She's upper caste. She is of a high society. Valli is not. It's also the balance of that as well, I think.
Yeah.
Which I thought was quite interesting. And yeah, it's said that when Murugan married Valli, Devana cried so much it poured all over Tiruparankundram, which is really sad. Understandably so. So there's a lot there. And in regard to the Variatum, there's actually text in the Sangam literature that talks about Variatum, but I did also read the conversation on Variatum, and the mention of it kind of disappeared through time in Sangam literature, which I thought was also controversial.
Yeah. Tolkapiam was sort of like the first mentions of references of like caste. So we don't really know if caste existed prior to Tolkapiam capturing it.
Yeah, we don't know,
or whether it wasn't there at all and it was then introduced into society.
And that really sort of takes us to the end of the episode. And I think the end of the episode is a bit of a different one today, because we're going to end it with the Sangam being prevalent in the modern day.
Yeah.
End it on some things that we found that we thought was like, oh, I didn't even think of that. I've been saying this and doing this, and we're like, oh, damn, I had no idea.
And there are a few references in Tamil songs where Kurandohe and various other poems from the Sangam era have been used in songs. So one of them is Nallai Allai by A.R. Rahman.
You know what? Mani Ratnam does a lot with Sangam. Sorry, I can't sleep if I can't mention Mani Ratnam.
Sendura from Borgan
Wow.
has references of poetry from Kurundohe. And the one that I've actually got like an example to run through with translation for you is a song called Yayam. And you mentioned
Iruver in Narumuhir. I think also Mani Ratnam, I believe.
Yes.
And in Narumuhir, there's definitely like Yayam, like lyrics or like from the same text. So if you go back to Yayam, which you definitely heard in the last, I want to say 5 years, it's like a banger. I'll insert the cinema album photography here. But the lyrics, that first sort of paragraph, the song starts off with Yayum Nyayum Yara Hero Andayum Nunnayum Amurai Kalir Sambula Pale Neer Pol Anbudai Nenjam Tan Kalandanavi, and then Kalandanavi repeats. So that is actually a simplified version of what Danisha has the actual text of.
So it starts the same. Yayum yayum yara hero endeyum nundeyum amurai kalir yanum niyum avvali aridum sembula peyanir pola anbudai nenjam tangala pandanave. And that what that translates to is, what is your mum to mine? How is your father related to mine? Although you and I not know each other in any way, just as the red earth pouring and the pouring rain, the love-filled hearts merged. And it's basically trying to draw a parallel to when there is rainfall, two lovers have like come together. Yeah. And then, like Nishani said, there is references to parents. Like they've brought in sort of the relationship that their parents will now have because they have joined together as lovers. And I think that's so...
And we're just singing these songs. No idea. No,
how deep it is.
Yeah, like, and this is why I always think it's important to, like, when you don't understand Tamil song you're singing, to try and understand it, because how the hell was I supposed to know we were singing, like, what was this? Purananuru? Kurundohe.
40.
Sangam literature. Yeah. So there was like that, and this is just one example that we could pick out like almost udane, because it's almost verbatim to the actual Sangam text.
Yeah.
But in loads of songs, there'll be like 1 line, 2 line
100%,
references, in addition to the scenery and the locations that are happening. I also came across in the Nayandara Sapadappadam, Annapurani, I believe that's what it's called. There's like a European visitor who comes to their restaurant or hotel to eat, and she has to make him some food, and she ends up making him a mean kolungure recipe, which she cites in the movie. This is an ancient Purananuru sapad. It was first mentioned in the Purananuru. And I was like, oh my God, it's not just songs and arts, it's food. And, you know, people who, you know, you might be making kolungure at home, adikadi, now you know where it's from. And also movies that we're seeing a lot more of it now, that sort of the focus is folklore, and the Kadavulhal associated in folklore, like that Kantara Padam, the Karnataka Padam, I think it was. That is sort of like folklore. Even Karnan, a lot of depictions of like folklore Kadavuls. And that is also thought to have sort of transcended from the whole, before, the way this text had written it was before organized religion, how Sangam divided the lands up. Each of the lands had the different deities, and over time the deities would have changed. So, sort of wrapping up the episode, the whole point of this podcast is to celebrate Tamilism and Tamilaham, and I think this episode was really amazing for us because it just, one, it was so empowering, but also two, there's so much knowledge that came to the forefront, which we're so excited to share with you, because it's just, I feel like it's our right to know, like, everything that we've come through today, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. There must be so much still that we just have no idea about. Ade Madri, if you have read any of the Sangam text before, please like let us know. Fascinating.
That's amazing. Right, and that brings us to the end of this episode. We have been your hosts, Danisha
and Shani,
and we will see you on the next episode.